Computer. Well, welcome. Today, I have an exciting opportunity to have the director of Christian educators here today. I have David Schmus with us. Welcome, David.
Thanks so much, Jessica. So happy to be here.
Yeah. And I would love to hear your story today as we're in this testimony series about your background in education and how you kind of got connected to Christian educators, because I think a lot of people maybe have never heard of them like me. I'd never heard of them until more recently. So we just love
hmm
to hear your story.
Sure, sure. I came into education a little bit differently than most. I started actually in seminary
Okay.
but never felt called to be a traditional church pastor. Wasn't sure why I was there, other than just had this sense that the Holy Spirit wanted me there.
Yeah.
And that just kept me there long enough to finish the program. But during that time, the Lord began to draw my attention towards the schools. Part of it was because my wife was a teacher, and so I
Okay.
kind of saw a little bit into that world through her. And I ended up, it was hard to get hired because I didn't have a credential yet when I started to move into that world. I had a seminary degree, but not a credential, which wasn't all
Yeah.
that wasn't all that valuable for public schools. But nonetheless, I did get hired at my alma mater, so I got to go back and teach
Oh,
high school at the place I went to high school. So I had
okay.
the right Letterman jacket and I had the right all that kind of stuff. That was fun.
You could sport
Um,
it on the team
there we
days.
go on the spirit days. Oh yeah, I milked that for all it was worth. Uh, but then, so I started teaching, found out I loved it, found out it was a good fit for me. It was sort of like one of those for this I was born kind of moments, where I realized,
Yeah.
okay, like I can do this, right?
Oh,
And
that's so cool.
but as I began to get more and more into teaching about my first 5 years or so, I began to realize, there's something else going on in my profession other than just me in my classroom and ministering to kids and teaching them history and all these kind of things. There was a lot of political stuff going on that I didn't really want to get involved with, but it sort of like came after me, if you will. And the way
Mm.
it kind of did was about 5 years in, my union was spending a tremendous amount of money on a ballot initiative in my state that really they were on the complete wrong side of it from a biblical
Okay.
perspective.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, wow, this is my union dues. I'm footing this bill for
Mm-hmm.
these ads, for this activism, all this stuff. How can I kind of stand before God in good conscience
Yeah.
and allow that to continue? And so I began
Yeah.
to search for options. And back then, you couldn't really get out of paying the union.
Okay.
You had to pay them still what's called an agency fee or a fair share fee. But I figured out how to do that, how to kind of get some rebates back. And I
Mm-hmm.
looked for alternatives for things like liability insurance, job coverage, protection, those kinds of things. And I found Christian Educators Association.
Okay.
So, and I thought, well, okay, here's an option that aligns with my worldview that provides liability insurance and all those things. So I signed up, much cheaper than the union dues, and so it was
That's awesome.
my the rebate I got back from the kind of the political part that the union supposedly gives back to you. That's their quote political part. They actually spend much more in politics on just that, but nonetheless, they give you a
Okay.
chunk of money back at that time. That was enough to pay the dues for Christian educators. So I said, okay, hey, that's a win-win. So I joined. Didn't think much about it. Just kind of had my coverage, right? So, but then about 10 years later, so this is about 2010. Sorry, about 5 years later, about 2010, I um I was invited to attend at the time what was called a Daniel weekend with Christian educators, and this was like, okay, what is this?
Okay.
And went and I had an epiphany that weekend, and it came along these lines. Essentially, this. Christian teachers in public schools are kind of a dime a dozen. You can go to any public school in America and find lots of teachers there who identify with Christianity, who go to
Mm-hmm.
church, who say their faith is important to them, all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you find teachers who really want to see the kingdom extended on their in their schools and are willing to
Mm.
put in the effort and the collaboration and the prayer and the ministry and to see that happen?
Right.
Those teachers are a little more rare, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went to this annual weekend, it was like, oh, I found my tribe, right? Because here
Oh,
they are. Like here are the
yeah.
teachers who want to see God move in their schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so
And
I was
that
so taken.
weekend, that Daniel weekend, that's all about seeking God's face on like your assignment, right? So was that the focus of?
Very much so, absolutely,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. We
Okay.
don't do Daniel weekends anymore. We now do something called Awake, which
Okay.
is I wouldn't say it's similar, but it kind of scratches the same itch, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, and so I got some additional training, and I started to lead Daniel weekends around the country, and I started to interact more and more with these teachers who were wanting to
Wow.
see God move, who were desperate for the Holy Spirit to
Wow.
act, and we're praying for that. And that was an eye-opening time for me, realizing, oh my gosh, like there's this army of teachers out there that are waiting to kind of be activated, are waiting to be resourced, are waiting to be encouraged to know they're not alone.
Yes.
And so I was doing that for several years. Then in 2015, it was funny that I had these 5-year things. I joined in 2005. I became activated in 2010. Then in 2015,
Hmm.
I was invited to come on staff to be mentored, essentially to be the next executive director.
Wow.
And I had to seek the Lord for a while because I liked teaching.
Hmm.
I also liked the stability of teaching, the
Hmm.
retirement plan, the health care benefits, and the 13 weeks a year off. I liked all that.
Yeah.
Um, but I had to decide, Lord, is this what you want me to do? I didn't want to just do a good idea. I wanted it to be a God idea, right? So,
Yeah.
I'm down in front church worshiping it was actually the last weekend before finals. So I had to
Okay.
make a decision. Am I going to say yes to this, or am I going to come back and teach the next year?
Yeah.
And I'm
Whew,
like, Lord,
down
what
to
do
the
I
wire.
do? Right. And it wasn't an audible voice, but it was like the Lord speaks to you. There was such gravitas that you kind of
Hmm.
know it's him. It was
Hmm.
one of those moments. And he said to
Impression.
me, Dave, my army is already in the schools. Your job is to wake them up.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay. I can do that. Not that I can do it alone, but I mean, I can get behind that vision, if you will.
Hmm.
And so I said yes, and that's exactly what happened. I was mentored for 2 years by my predecessor, Finn Larson, a great man of God, and
Wow.
then became executive director in 2017. And so I've been working to, in a sense, wake up that army ever since. So
Yeah. Wow. That's so, yeah, it's just really exciting. It's convicting too to hear, because I think I'm not the only one, but I worked in Washington for a long time.
mm,
And I just remember paying my NEA dues and not even knowing exactly where the money went. But at that time, there wasn't that teacher right to work piece where
yeah.
I think was it 5 years ago that
Yeah,
was,
2018 was the Supreme Court case says you no longer have to pay agency fees or fair share fees. You can just now get out of the union entirely and not pay them any dues. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so if you don't already know that, I want you to be aware of that,
Yeah.
that you do have a choice on whether, number one, you want legal representation or not. You want that insurance, or if you'd like to go with something different. David is representing Christian educators, which is a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll share more later about
Mm-hmm.
they have more than just insurance available.
Yes.
But um, yeah. So as a part of helping Christian educators, helping teachers to learn about their faith rights in schools, can you share
Mhm.
like the main points that would help give our listeners some clarity with regards to how they can live out their faith at school?
Yeah, yeah, and let me preface that by saying that, Jessica, we at Christian Educator kind of do two things. One thing we do is what you've already mentioned. We're a professional association for teachers in public schools. We provide all those coverages and liability insurance and all that stuff. And our members call us all the time with issues, and we walk them through those things. And I'll say more about that later. But the other thing we do is what you've put on right here, is that we equip teachers how to walk out their faith, how to incarnate Christ
Yeah.
in the public schools without getting fired, right? And
Yeah.
because we know there are legal limitations, we know the Establishment Clause of the Constitution governs a lot of this. And so, how do you do that without fear,
Mm-hmm.
with confidence,
Mm-hmm.
and to stand on the right ground to know that not only am I honoring the Lord, but I'm also honoring the law that I'm under.
Yeah.
And so we do our best. So give you a
Which
little
is so
overview.
empowering. I just have to say
Yeah.
that it's so empowering
Oh,
for people
good.
to know their rights than to know how to do it. Because I think people
Yes,
just
and
feel
because
frozen.
right, because what happens if they don't know is they tend to like stay away from that line, right? They get
Yeah.
as far back from it as they can, as
Yeah.
opposed to if they know their rights, then they're okay pushing into that
Yes.
space where they think, okay, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
It's good.
So let me give you some general guidelines. Obviously, we will, in a short podcast episode, we won't cover all the ins and outs here, but
Yeah.
first
But the overview.
yeah, first let me say that students can do almost anything, and so there occasionally hear news stories of students told, "Hey, you can't bring your Bible to school, or you can't use your Bible for like silent reading time, or whatever. You can't pray." No, students can do almost anything as long as they're not obstructing the activities of the school. As long as they're not interfering with your ability to teach a class. Students can do almost anything in regards to their faith. So they can share their
Okay.
faith, they can pass out religious literature, they can meet with other students to pray, to have clubs, all those things. And so if you see your school treading on any students' religious rights, they're probably doing it. They're probably in the wrong, and they're going to get sued, or they're going to lose that
So
situation.
students can pass out paper
Oh,
inviting people
absolutely.
to things. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
The general idea is they can't have viewpoint discrimination. So if a student is allowed to hand out an invitation to a party this weekend to their friend during recess or during passing periods, then
Mhm.
they can pass out a religious tract, right? Or a
Okay.
gospel tract, right? Okay, so if you take the religious part out of it, are they allowed to do that activity? If they are, then they're allowed to do it, as a religious outreach or what have you, right? So
Okay.
they can't discriminate just because it's religious, is the idea.
Okay.
If they're interrupting class, well, that's different. Okay.
Hmm.
All right. Teacher rights are limited because we are agents of the state, right? As a public school teacher, you go into a school, you're a government employee. And so that involves some very tricky things sometimes, things like compelled speech, right? We can be required to teach certain curriculums that we don't
Hmm.
like. We have to be sometimes we have to be silent when we don't want to be silent to abide by the law. But we do retain a degree of rights,
Okay.
and so I'll get into some of those. But before I say that, let me also say that the rights go both ways. What I mean by that is this: the Establishment Clause of the Constitution. Of course, a lot of people say separation of church and state, and lots of other people know separation of church and state is not in the Constitution, right? That language is not
Hmm.
in the Constitution. What is in the Constitution is the Establishment Clause, that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion.
Okay.
And what we interpret that now to mean is that what the Supreme Court interprets that now to mean is that you can't favor religion as a government employee, but you also can't disfavor religion as a government employee. Okay.
Okay.
So it would be illegal or unconstitutional for me to stand up in my class and have an altar call. But it's also unconstitutional for me to stand up in my class and say, you're a fool if you believe in Jesus.
Hmm.
Okay. Or to diminish people by their faith, right? Or
Okay.
to diminish faith in general.
Okay.
So schools have to be neutral on religion. Okay.
Hmm.
They cannot be favor or they cannot be favorable
Okay.
to religion. And that's very important to know because
Hmm.
a lot of times, sometimes those on the kind of secular side of things think, oh, the Christians have their private Christian schools. Well, we have the public schools. No, 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 no. All of us have the public schools, right?
Uh-huh.
And so the public schools are have to be neutral on religion.
Okay.
Um, in fact, there was a case recently where there was a FCA club in California, in San Jose, at Pioneer High School, and there was a teacher on staff, a teacher who was represented very, very LGBTQ friendly,
Okay.
and he got their statement of faith, he got their statement on marriage, and he basically put them up on his whiteboard in his class and said, "Hey, isn't how does this make you feel?" And he essentially conducted a campaign against the FCA club, got them
Mm.
decertified, like so they could not be an official club on campus anymore, and students ended up heckling their meetings, and
Wow.
it devolved into this little bit of a circus.
Hmm.
Now COVID kind of came and interrupted that, but there ended up being a lawsuit, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals just ruled a couple months ago in a 9-2 decision, so it's pretty overwhelming, that the school officials in that case created a hostile environment for those FCA club, for those
Yeah.
FCA kids, that they had a right to do what they were doing,
Hmm.
even though the school officials disagreed with them about marriage, about sexuality, about a whole host of things, those students had a religious right to do what they were doing, and
Okay.
then so those school officials were creating a hostile environment for them, and the FCA won that case. So,
So
so
what did
yeah,
they do to clean up the mess after that? Does
well, the FCA has a right now to continue to meet and be an official club and all that kind of stuff. But
Okay.
but yeah,
Okay.
I know it's not fun in terms of the
Whew.
relationships involved, I'm
Yeah.
sure. But yeah. Okay, so now that we've established that rights go both ways, the guiding principle, as I've already mentioned, is you can't favor religion or disfavor religion, right? And
Hmm.
so almost any teacher can ask themselves, if I did this action or if I said this thing, would I be favoring my faith?
Hmm.
And if so, in my official capacity, right? In my official capacity as a teacher, this isn't governing what you do, on weekends if you run into your student at Starbucks or at church or whatever, right? You're
Hmm.
not on the clock, right? But if
Right.
you're in your official capacity as a teacher, and if you favor religion, okay, it's probably unconstitutional. And that's, I'm not an attorney, so don't interpret this as official legal advice. I have attorneys that work for me, but nonetheless, but that's kind of generally the rule. But what can you do? Because that's always fun to talk about is what can you do, right?
Right.
So you don't have to hide who you are to be a public school teacher. So you can answer questions honestly when students ask. If someone says, "Hey, Mr. Schmus, are you a Christian, or do you go to church, or do you believe Jesus rose from the dead?" Let's say they're talking about Easter in your class.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Christian. Yes, I believe Jesus rose from the dead. Yes, I go to church on Sundays. Um, One thing that I did when I was a teacher is the first day of school, I would introduce myself, and
Mm-hmm.
I would talk about the fact that I have a master's degree in biblical and theological studies, and I would say as just part of my background and training.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, for those of you that go to church, this means that I have some of the similar training to maybe what your priest or pastor has.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And by saying that, I'm not violating the Constitution. I'm just sharing about my background. All the students are sharing about their lives. We're just all introducing ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to lie about who you are to be a Christian. So they would know I'm a Christian, right?
Yeah.
And
You've opened the
that would
door.
open up other opportunities that might come up down the road, right?
Yeah.
Um, you can certainly pray with colleagues on your campus. You can get together at lunch, you can before school, after school. There's no limits on that. If they, allow teachers to get together for like a yoga class or whatever, then they have to let people get together for religious reasons as well.
Mm-hmm.
You certainly can teach about religion. So, in fact, in many states, the state standards require you to teach about religion,
Mm-hmm.
but you just have to do it in a non-devotional way, right? So you can say Christians believe this, Muslims believe this, Buddhists believe this, right? And you can explain things that way.
Okay.
You can advise a Christian club, right? Now, in your advising of a Christian club or a good, you have to sort of you can't be the one teaching it or leading it or praying for kids. You're really there to kind of make sure that the kids are supervised, but you can certainly create space for that to happen on your campus by being the advisor.
Okay.
If you do it after school, if you follow certain rules, you can actually lead, let's say, a good news club. You can be the Bible teacher or the prayer or the
I was
gospel
just going to ask
presenter.
that because I've heard a few
Yeah.
teachers that are doing that. Okay.
Yeah, the way that you do that is rather than saying, "Hey kids, let's meet in my room after school for a gospel lesson." No, you go to the district, you say, "I'm a representative of Child Evangelism Fellowship or whatever my organization is,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd like to request the use of this room after school, just like any other outside organization would." And if you do that, you essentially put on your volunteer hat for the
Okay.
other organization,
Yeah.
and then you act in that manner. And you get the permission and you pay, if you have to pay a fee because they charge all groups fees,
Mm-hmm.
then you pay the fee or whatever you have to do. Show that you have insurance, whatever the hoops you have to jump through.
Mm-hmm.
Then you do that, and then you can lead that good news club, assuming it's after your contract hours.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
that's good.
so yeah,
Mhm.
that's a wonderful thing. Lots of our people do.
Yeah.
I don't know how much longer you want me to go on, but you can also supplement your curriculum with other sources that are religiously neutral. So if you feel like, for example, you're teaching evolution,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to bring in some things that maybe are critical of evolution. I wouldn't bring in creation science materials. The courts have not been favorable to that. But if
Okay.
you want to bring in things that say, "Oh, these people don't believe in evolution, and because of this scientific reason,"
Yeah.
then you bring those in. Generally speaking, it's better to get forgiveness than permission on
Okay.
those things, because
Okay.
if you go ask your principal ahead of time, "Hey, could I teach this?" What are you asking your principal to do? You're asking your principal to take on the liability or the risk of that,
Oh,
and you're
that's good.
transferring it from him to you,
Yeah.
right? Or from
Yeah.
you to him, right? Or her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not sure how fair that is, right? So you take on the risk. You present it just using your discretion as an educator,
Mm-hmm.
right? As an expert in your field. Do it in a scientific way. Or, don't talk about faith or religion or what Genesis says. And then if someone complains, you have a support for it. Hey, I'm just teaching science, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Ultimately, push comes to shove. Could they require you not to teach that? Yes, they can. They can. The school has a right to determine the curriculum in your classroom, right? So, but better to stay under the radar and just sort of use your academic freedom as a teacher to bring some of that stuff in, then call attention to it at the beginning and try to get permission and get someone else to take the risk of that.
Hmm.
So there's lots of things you can use sacred music and say in your music programs, as long as it has an academic purpose and it's not and it's balanced with other selections.
Okay.
So if you have a Christmas concert, you sing Silent Night, but you also should probably sing Santa Claus is Coming to Town, right? And it should be there should be an academic purpose, and part of that academic purpose can be I'm showing the students what the ways our community celebrates Christmas, right?
Okay.
So this is what the Christians do. This is what the Jews do. This is what others do,
Yeah.
and that's the academic purpose of that. So there's a ton of stuff you
Yeah.
can do. So
Yeah. I actually had I think it was a teacher the other day was asking me about just being disappointed that our district had recently cut out Christmas as something we
mhm.
couldn't celebrate anymore. And when
Mm,
I worked in Washington, we were never allowed to do that. So I was like, wow, in Kansas, you're allowed to celebrate Christmas. And
yeah,
even one of the districts sang all the songs were about Jesus, but it was a
yeah,
predominantly Catholic community, which that's
yeah,
interesting because it
yeah.
represents the way the community celebrates. But they were saying, how could we bring it in? And I'm thinking, well, you could talk about all the different ways that people around the world celebrate
That's
Christmas
right. That's
because
right.
you're actually introducing religion that way
Yeah,
too.
yeah. I mean,
But you just
theoretically,
fully
yeah,
present
you
them.
could even put a manger scene in your classroom, as
Okay.
long as also had Santa, you also had a Hanukkah menorah. You could
Kwanzaa.
sort of
Yeah.
have this holiday display of all the different holidays,
Hmm.
and include a manger and just tell your kids these are what people do during this season, and keep it academic in nature. That typically is totally fine. Now, when districts have policies against any kind of holiday celebration, that's a little harder because unconstitutional policies are the ones that single out a specific religion or religion in general.
Okay.
But if they just, if they say, "Oh, you can celebrate Kwanzaa and Hanukkah, but you can't celebrate Christmas," okay, well, okay, they're going to lose that one, right? They're going to lose that case.
Hmm.
But if they just say, "We're not celebrating holidays," that's unfortunate, but it probably would stand up in court.
Okay. Because it covers all of them in
It
that
treats
way.
everyone the same. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, where can teachers go to learn more about the do's and don'ts of sharing their faith at school?
Sure. Our website is a great place to start.
Okay.
ChristianEducators.org. We have something there called the Resource Center. So if you go to our homepage, there's a link there for the Resource Center.
Excellent.
And some specific things I would point out there. There's an hour-long webinar called Teach with Faith, Not
Okay.
Fear. That's a great place to start. It kind of is a longer version of some of those things I was saying earlier. It kind of goes through all the ins and outs and some of the more details of what you can and can't do.
Okay.
So that's a great way to get some training. There's also a webinar there called How to Reach More Students with Christian Club. So if you're curious about what I was saying earlier about, oh, can I do a Good News Club or a Bible Club
Yeah.
or an FCA group, that's a place you want to go to get your questions answered about those kinds of things.
Okay.
Also, there's a flyer on our website called Your Religious Liberties as a public school educator. Uh, Quick and easy download. I would say just take a look at that. And that has some of those just this more popular do's and don'ts
Hmm.
that would give you a good place to start. And it's a quick read. And then finally, we have a ministry partner that we love working with called Gateways to Better Education. They're at gogateways.org. And they have some great resources, especially about the holidays. If you're looking for things like Easter, Christmas, how do I, St. Patrick's Day, which is one I used to love because the St. Patrick's story was so compelling. How do I tell these stories and let my kids know what's going on and what are the traditions and histories of these holidays are? They
Yes.
also have some great. They've done research on every single state and their academic standards
Oh, wow.
and where the Bible, where Christianity, where Jesus, things like that show up in those state standards. And so you'd be sure not to miss those opportunities, right? Because
That's
your state is
great.
asking you to teach these things. It'd be a
Yeah.
shame if you just didn't know they were in the standards.
Yeah.
GoGateways.org is a great resource to look for as well.
That's wonderful. And then David, what should teachers do if they need some legal advice or support?
Yeah. Please get in touch with us through our website at ChristianEducators.org. We'd love to talk to you about what we offer. And there's also a site there called a page called we call the unions page. It's just ChristianEducators.org/unions.
Hmm.
And that will give you some real interesting information about what your union is paying for, where your union dues are going, and also show you how to get out of your union. There
Hmm.
are opt-out windows in many states, but some states don't have any opt-out windows, and so we can certainly help you navigate that. There's a procedure on that page to help you navigate that, and And I just like to say that, I think we offer better support than the unions do. One, we offer $2 million of liability coverage as opposed to 1 million.
Okay.
So we have double the coverage what the unions typically offer.
Mhm.
We also, something important to know is that especially as Christians, union protections really are done at their discretion. In other words, they will stand behind you in many ways, but really ultimately it's their decision. So if they don't like what you've done, or if they disagree with what you've done, and you're facing some challenge for what you've done, an allegation, a disciplinary issue, it's really up to them, how to what extent that they will support you and protect you, even
Cool.
even in terms of the insurance coverages.
Okay.
Versus with Christian educators, your coverage is in your name.
Mhm.
And so even if we don't like what you did, then you still have your coverage. And
Okay.
again, it's double what the unions offer. We also provide a local attorney for you if you have a
Mhm.
job action issue, a
Mhm.
local representation that will come to you and be local in your community there. And so we have such a community of people that want to love you and support you and encourage you. And so I really say, if you want to stay in the public school arena, I hope we've seen God raise up this army of people who are saying, "Hey, the public schools is my mission field." If
Yes.
that's you, but you don't want to have your dues going to things that undermine your values, it's a little bit like you're trying to build a foundation, and meanwhile you're kind of out digging it out from underneath by paying union dues,
Mhm.
because they're supporting all the gender confusion and all the stuff we're seeing in our schools. I think it's a no-brainer why you wouldn't quit your union and join us. It's possible you could get some local backlash, but as Christians, we deal with that, right? We say, okay, bless it. We pray for those who persecute us, and
Yeah.
God turns those stories around so often where someone comes against us, and we pray and we love them back, and
Yeah.
we get to see God do amazing things in their lives too. So
Yeah.
don't let that stop you.
Yeah. And it reminds me too, David, like sometimes we just need to be reminded, like, okay, God put me here and I'm to
Right?
be a light. I'm not hiding in the closet.
That's right.
And we have to
That's
make
right.
some tough decisions sometimes.
That's right.
Is it
Absolutely.
is
Absolutely.
I know you mentioned this at the very beginning. Before we close this episode, I
Hmm.
had heard last week from a local, there's another alternative that's available in the US besides Christian educators, but
Yeah.
they don't have the Christian bent.
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and they were saying that we would normally pay $650 per year to NEA,
Hmm.
and then you're like half,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's twice as much
Yeah,
coverage.
our coverage is 259 a year. And it's the exact, by the way, AAE is a great organization. We work with them sometimes.
Okay.
And their coverage is the exact same as ours. We get it from the same place. We're all part of the same insurance group.
Mhm.
And so the coverage is identical.
Yeah.
But we offer the biblical support and a lot of the ministry stuff we do, which we'll talk about some other time maybe, but all the
Yes.
Awake and Lift and the magazine and all the great stuff we do to support teachers in public schools. So Christian teachers in public schools. So yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, funny in California where I'm at, union dues are almost about $1,200 a year.
Oh,
So
wow.
we're
Okay.
actually
So
about 20% of the union dues in our state, and it varies depending on what your state is. But we're
okay.
generally about a third of the cost as an average,
Okay.
a fourth to a third of the cost of union dues.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
Hmm.
Well, David, I'm really excited about you just saying yes to this podcast today. And then
Hmm.
I didn't say this at the very beginning, but it's been such a just a really neat God connection to get to know you,
Yes.
even through doing the summit. And, podcast listeners, I was talking about this
Yes.
earlier in the fall, but I got to speak at the summit, and David and his wife, Elizabeth, listened to my session, and then we got to connect. And, God
Hmm.
just has us connect with different people, just like we're praying that you would connect with other Christian teachers in your school, in your region.
Hmm.
God's on the move, and he's waking us up to the crazy
That's
cool
right.
calling that he has to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth through education. And I just
That's
think that
right.
God is doing some really neat things through this organization, and I just want to get
Hmm.
behind them and say that this is a good place to be. They've got resources, they've got publications, there's all sorts of things out there to make you feel like you're part of a family and that you're
Hmm.
not alone, and to help you connect with people locally. So,
Yes.
David, thank you again for being here for this part, and we're going to actually put another episode together for you. So keep
Sweet.
listening if you'd like to hear more of David's story and what God's been doing in and through him.
Great. And Jessica, you are doing amazing work. So we are so excited to partner with you and get to know more about what Kingdom Educators is doing. So yeah, so kudos to what you're doing as well.
Thank you so much.